After losing his wife to tuberculosis, struggling with poverty, alcohol, and depression, things finally seemed to be on the right track. The whereabouts of Poe from September 26th to October 3rd are unknown. Many of the misconceptions of Poe being an alcoholic, drug abuser, and morose figure came from this chronicle. According to Moran, Poe's last words were, "It's officially spooky season. Time for ghosts, goblins, and things that go bump in the night. Hopefully, you'll catch some horror movies while munching on some candy, enjoy a hayride or two, and sip on some apple cider by the fire." All that's great, but no pumpkin season would be complete without a deadly dose of Edgar Allan Poe. Whether this is your first time reading his work or you just want a refresher, here are the top 7 strange facts about the last days and the aftermath of Poe's death. By the fall of 1849, things were shaping up for the better for Poe. After losing his wife to tuberculosis, struggling with poverty and depression, things finally seemed to be on the right track. He was regularly booking speaking engagements and sometimes reading his poem The Raven before a captive audience. And he reconnected with his childhood sweetheart, Elmira Royster Sheldon, now a wealthy widow. When the pair were young, Elmira and Poe were neighbors, and their relationship continued until Poe attended the University of Richmond. Elmira's father hid all of Poe's letters and their courtship ended. 2 years later, thinking Poe forgot about her, she married Alexander Sheldon. Upon his death in 1844, she inherited $100,000, about $3.7 million today, with a stipulation that if she remarried, she would lose 75% of it. One day in 1848, Poe showed up at her estate and the two rekindled their courtship, although Elmira's family did not approve. Although she was unsure, Poe had actively sought her hand in marriage. If they had been able to marry, Poe might have had the resources he needed to further his writing career. At the same time, due to a lack of copyright laws, writing was usually a profession for someone who already had money. Although the facts are a bit murky, it is assumed that the pair were indeed engaged. On September 26, 1849, he had complained to Elmira about feeling sick and hallucinating from what he described as a cholera attack. The next morning, he left Richmond for a trip to New York to relocate for a job as an editor, starting off the new marriage with gainful employment. When he said his goodbyes to his new fiancée, he would embark on a trip from which he would never return. The whereabouts of Poe from September 26th to October 3rd are unknown. He was discovered outside of Ryan's 4th Ward polls in Baltimore, delirious and wearing someone else's clothes. He was recognized by a printer, Joseph Walker. Poe had asked Walker to request the assistance of an acquaintance, Joseph Snodgrass. Walker wrote to him on Poe's behalf. "Dear sir, there is a gentleman, rather the worse for the wear, at Ryan's 4th Ward polls who goes under the cognomen of Edgar A. Poe, and who appears in great distress, and he says he is acquainted with you, and I assure you he is in need of immediate assistance. Yours in haste, Joseph W. Walker." Snodgrass described Poe's appearance as repulsive, and later claimed the letter from Walker said Poe was in a state of beastly intoxication. It would seem that upon observation, the assumption was that Poe was drunk. Dr. Moran, the attending physician at Washington College Hospital, where Poe was taken, had him confined to a room with bars, where drunk people were kept. Poe wasn't allowed visitors, and Dr. Moran may have been the only visitor Poe had in his final hours. Any accounts from Dr. Moran should be taken with a grain of salt, since over the years he changed his account of events several times. He also wrote and spoke about Poe's death, potentially profiting from his accounts. It is reported that Poe called out the name Reynolds over and over again. There are no proper accounts of who Reynolds was, although there are a few possibilities. One of them being Henry R. Reynolds, one of the judges overseeing the 4th Ward polls at Ryan's Tavern, who may have met Poe on Election Day, coinciding with his death day. According to Moran, Poe's last words were, "Lord, help my poor soul." He died on October 7th, 1849, at the age of 40. After Poe passed away, news spread quickly. His fiancée Elmira learned of his death by reading the newspaper. Just 2 days after his death, an obituary was written in the New York Tribune, signed by Ludwig. The name, however, was fake. It was written by one of Poe's fiercest rivals, Rufus Griswold. Griswold then bastard Poe, smearing his name after his death. He even named him as Edgar Allan Poe, even though he went by Edgar A. Poe. This is significant since he abbreviated the A to distance himself from his foster father John Allan, the source of the name. Griswold knew that, but printed it anyway. To make matters worse, in 1850 Griswold wrote a memoir of Poe titled Memoir of the Author. Many of the misconceptions of Poe being an alcoholic, drug abuser, and morose figure came from this chronicle. Many who knew Poe denounced it, including another of Poe's bitter rivals, Thomas Dunn English. The caricature of Poe Griswold created launched Poe into eternal infamy. Poe, however, had the last laugh. The story had the opposite effect Griswold intended. Many of those falsities are still woven into the minds of the public, ironically appealing to a greater audience. On a cold and cloudy afternoon on October 8, 1849, a funeral service was held for Poe at the Westminster Burial Grounds in Baltimore. There were few in attendance. The funeral was presided over by the Reverend Clem, cousin of Poe's wife Virginia. The entire ceremony lasted only 3 minutes in the cold, damp weather. Poe was buried in an unmarked grave in the churchyard next to his grandfather, David Poe Sr. 24 years later, a poet, Paul Hamilton Hayne, visited Poe's grave and published a newspaper article decrying its poor condition and suggesting a better monument. Many in Baltimore and throughout the United States contributed and were able to raise $1,500, about $41,000 today, towards a new headstone. A new headstone was fashioned complete with a medallion of Poe's bust. The grave is visited regularly, with events being held on or around his death date of October 7th. There are many theories as to how or why Poe died. All medical records, including his death certificate, are lost, and any theory is therefore inconclusive. Some prominent theories are that Poe died from cholera, given his state of hallucination and other symptoms consistent with the disease. A conspiracy involving his fiancée's family, who greatly disapproved of her and Poe's engagement, and some even say he may have had a brain tumor. One of the more popular theories is that he was the victim of cooping. This was an election fraud scam in which victims were kidnapped off the street by local election gangs, imprisoned in a small room called the coop, drugged, and forced sometimes with alcohol or beatings to get them to comply. The cooping victims were then used as pawns to vote for a political party at multiple locations. Often their clothing would be changed, and they would be given disguises such as wigs, fake beards, or mustaches to fool voting officials and vote multiple times. Poe was found on Election Day in someone else's clothes, giving a strong suspicion of his victimization. Some other theories include diabetes, various types of enzyme deficiency, syphilis, apoplexy, delirium tremens, epilepsy, and meningeal inflammation. Although some are more probable than others, we may never know with absolute certainty who or what killed Edgar Allan Poe. After attention was brought to the poor conditions of Poe's grave, money was raised for a new headstone along with a new location. In 1860, Edgar Allan Poe's cousin Nelson Poe ordered a proper marble headstone to mark his grave. However, that headstone was destroyed in a freak train accident while it was being fabricated. Nelson did not have the funds to order another one, so a replacement was never ordered, leaving the lackluster sandstone slab as Poe's official tombstone. By 1865, a movement had begun under the leadership of Miss Sarah Sigourney Rice for a new monument to Baltimore's most famous poet. Through grassroots efforts, they were able to raise half of the necessary funds, and by 1874, Mr. George W. Childs of Philadelphia covered the rest, and the body was exhumed and moved to the front of the cemetery with the new headstone. His original burial site was marked with a headstone that bears his name, which still stands today. The monument was dedicated on November 17, 1875. At this time, the event was more well attended. Walt Whitman was there, and letters from Longfellow, John G. Whittier, William C. Bryant, and Alfred Tennyson were read. His mother-in-law, Marie Clem, was buried next to him, and in 1885, the body of his wife, Virginia, was moved from New York to be alongside him as well. The life of Edgar Allan Poe is often honored on the day of his death, October 7th. The International Edgar Allan Poe Festival in Baltimore is celebrated each year during the first weekend in October. Put on by the Poe House in Baltimore, people gather to listen to music, watch films, tour the various Poe sites, including his grave, as well as find really cool items from vendors. It's ironic that a big part of his renown can be attributed to a smear campaign by one of his bitter rivals. That dark and moody repertoire has inspired artists everywhere to adapt his writings into other mediums. There have been over 300 comic book adaptations and dozens of novels. The Beatles album, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, includes Poe as one of the people in the crowd on the front cover. Poe even found his way into video games. Fallout 4 features Fort Independence after a nuclear war. In the basement, a skeleton can be found entombed in a wall as a reference to the cask of Amontillado. Nearby is a case of Amontillado wine with the label reading Montresor and being bottled by P. Edgar. There are podcasts like 6 Degrees of Poe. Authors like Stephen King have incorporated Poe into their writings. There have also been many film adaptations of his work. Of course, our favorites are the ones we made: The Cask of Amontillado, The Raven, and Telltale Heart. Check the notes below for links. Well, there you have it. The mysteries around Poe's death and legacy are as interesting and peculiar as his stories and poems. As you curl up by the fire this Halloween, grab your favorite Poe story, poem, or artistic adaptation and try to remember it's just a story. Or is it?